It's September 9th, 2001. British host Chris Tarrant welcomes 8 contestants to Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. They're all eager to get rich, but to sit on the hot seat, you have to win fastest finger first.
Put these words in the order they occur in the title of the Agatha Christie thriller. Nile on Death the.
The correct answer is Death on the Nile.
All these were correct. Most of them, nearly all of them. Who was fastest? Charles Ingram in 3.97. That's so fast.
Great. Major Charles Ingram has been a contestant twice before. Now he finally gets his chance. Confidently, he takes his place. But this confidence doesn't last long. Ingram is often unsure of his answers. After just 7 out of 15 questions, he merely has 1 of his 3 jokers left. But somehow he manages to answer correctly again and again. And then the time has come. Just 1 more correct answer separates him from £1 million.
A number 1, followed by 100 zeros, is known by what name? Google. Megatron. Gigabit. Nanomole.
I don't think I've heard of a Google.
But seconds later, even though he never heard of a Google, he completely changes his guess.
I really do think it's a Google.
The tension in the studio is almost unbearable.
You just won $1 million!
Only 2 people managed to achieve that before him. An incredible run against all odds. Maybe too incredible. In fact, Major Charles Ingram cheated. He is quite possibly the biggest fraud who has ever been on television. He and his accomplices have been tried and convicted. Their heist has been publicized and fictionalized. Yet, to this day, they maintain their innocence.
We didn't do it. We really didn't cheat.
20 years later, there are still a lot of open questions. And behind Ingram's case lurks an even weirder story. One of an underground organization that systematically exploited the show for years. How did they do it? While Ingram is celebrating his victory in front of the camera, there's turmoil behind the scenes. The showrunners are sussed out. A sound technician already called their CEO Paul Smith, while Ingram was still answering questions. Smith told him to keep the show going. Ingram receives a check with his winnings from Tarrant. But the check is retained by Celador, the company behind the show, for 8 days for processing. In the meantime, Smith and the technicians look back at their material. Ingram often seemed to have no clue, really. How did this guy, after being left with 1 joker at £4,000, snatch $1 million? The probability of just guessing a 1 in 4 7 times in a row plus a 1 in 2 is 0.003%. No way, right? They look at his speech pattern when thinking about his answers.
Craig David, I just can't. I don't think I've never heard of Craig David, to be honest.
There's something interesting happening here. No matter the question, Ingram goes through all 4 possible answers, often chronologically, repeatedly.
Emmental is a cheese from which country?
It could be France, I suppose. Then again, it could be Italy, so... or maybe it's the Netherlands.
Right. Yes. That's sort of how the question works, Charles.
No, I got it.
That in itself might still be quite normal behavior. It seems fairly rational to go one by one if you're not sure. But then...
Who was the second husband of Jacqueline Kennedy? Adnan Khashoggi, Ronald Reagan, Aristotle Onassis, Rupert Murdoch.
Okay, I'm not certain. I would have thought that it would be Aristotle Onassis.
Why?
Wait, someone coughed just now at the correct option.
Aristotle Onassis.
Aristotle Onassis was indeed married to Kennedy. Huh. And then it happens again.
But the reason I think it's cricket is because
and again.
I think it was Holbein.
The studio obviously has cameras and mics for the candidate and the show host, but it also has cameras and mics pointed at the audience for reaction shots. The technicians start looking at what's happening in the crowd while Ingram is reading out the options. Who is coughing? And always at the right time?
Which American platform was founded in 2012 and is known for its creative and interactive online lessons? A. Biscuit. B. Bilingual. C. Bicycle. D. Brilliant.
You already know it. Brilliant is a great way to learn new skills across a variety of subjects like math, programming, and artificial intelligence. You can choose between thousands of interactive lessons without ever feeling bored or overwhelmed. You can customize your content to fit your needs and work through the exercises at your own pace. For example, there's a course on statistical fundamentals. So if you'd like to know how likely it is to win $1 million on the show purely by guessing, or if all these coughs could be random, that might be a good starting point. If that's not your cup of tea, there's a vast library of other stuff, and new lessons are added every month. To try everything Brilliant has to offer, free for a full 30 days, visit brilliant.org/fern or click on the link in the description. You'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription.
Last night on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire?
Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was a sensation in the UK at the time. The show was just 4 years old, and at its height about 19 million people tuned in, a third of the entire population. People were obsessed with it. That was also the case with Charles Ingram and his wife Diana. Her brother Adrian Pollock had been on the show 4 times before, on the hot seat once, and won £32,000. A few months later, she managed to get on the hot seat and won £32,000 as well.
So I remember talking to her in the bar afterwards, and I said, "Great, congratulations." She said, "Only 32. And I said to her, "It's a huge amount of money." She went, "Yes, but I should have done more. I should have beaten my brother and all this."
Mind you, it is incredibly difficult to get a spot on this show. Thousands, if not millions of people try. The selection process is brutal, but this family managed to get in over and over again. They knew the system inside out and how to play it. Adrian even had a mock-up fastest finger first console at home. He and Diana wanted to publish a book with tips on how to get on the show. But as it turns out, they were not the only ones who knew the system. And some were a lot better at exploiting it. Who Wants to Be a Millionaire is not broadcast live and has a set runtime. So when Charles finally gets his shot, filming stops for the day after the £4,000 question.
And I remember us saying, "God, that poor bloody Major, you know, he's got as much chance of getting the 32,000, you know, as going to the moon in a rocket." I mean, there was just no way this guy could possibly go much further.
Ambitious Diana is frustrated with Charles. That would make sense, because Charles is a smart man. He holds university degrees in engineering and management and will later be accepted by Mensa. That evening, as the couple is on their way home on the M4, their frustrations likely intensify as they dwell on the opportunity for immense wealth slipping away right from under their grasp. They will not let that happen. Diana and Charles call Tegwin Wittock. He's a Welsh college lecturer and fellow game show enthusiast. Adrian and Diana have been training Tegwin and helping him to get on the show. He's supposed to be a candidate tomorrow, so he will be in the studio. Charles, Diana, and Tegwin are on the phone for 5 minutes. They supposedly devise a very simple, yet effective plan. Charles reads out the answers. Whoever knows the answer coughs when it comes up.
Have you got a strategy?
Well, I have actually. I have got a strategy. I was a bit defensive on the last show. You know, I sort of started talking myself out of answers that, frankly, I should have known and did know. So this time I'm going on the counterattack.
This counterattack obviously works. Though he repeatedly says he has no idea or never heard of certain options, he goes on to 180 pivot seconds later.
Craig David, I just can't. I don't think I've never heard of Craig David, to be honest. I've just never heard of Craig David, so... No, I'll go Craig David. Yeah.
You just won £32,000.
I don't think it's Paris. I think it's Berlin. I'm going to go for Paris.
You thought it was Berlin. You changed your mind to Paris. That brought you 500,000.
I don't think I've heard of a Google. I don't actually know what a Google is, but I really do think it's a Google.
You just won $1 million!
Back behind the scenes, a total of 192 coughs have been recorded by the microphones in the studio. A lot of them when a correct answer was mentioned. Paul Smith is confident this can't be a coincidence and calls the police. Later, he makes another call.
Mr. Ingram, we didn't meet. I am the managing director of Celador.
Right.
I think I should just get straight to the point.
Yep.
And effectively say what is a pre-prepared statement here. I have to tell you that we have suspicions from viewing the recording of last Monday's program and subsequently studying the tapes carefully that there were irregularities during the taping of the show in which you participated.
Oh, good Lord, no.
Because of that, I have to tell you that these suspicions have been referred to the police.
Right.
And thus, we, not for the moment, will be airing the program or indeed authorizing payment of the check.
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, you know, I completely refute that, obviously. Good Lord, I'm absolutely gobsmacked. All right, well, thanks for letting me know.
Okay, thank you.
Cheers, bye.
1.5 years later, the case went to trial. It quickly turned into a tabloid frenzy. The story of major fraud was just too sensational. In the end, all 3 defendants were found guilty. 2 documentaries were made. The Ingrams never accepted the verdict.
We didn't cheat on that show. There was no plan to cheat on that show. I won that money perfectly honestly and fairly and squarely.
Devil's advocate, wouldn't Wittock's chronic illness also be a brilliant cover? If he was just a man who coughed constantly, who would suspect these coughs to be hints? Simple, yes, but also brilliantly hiding in plain sight. More generally, how likely is it that 19 significant coughs
The reason I think
are just a coincidence? Liam Shaw made a fascinating statistical analysis to answer this very question.
And I remembered the case from when I was a child, and I was very interested in the statistics of the unlikeliness of the coughing coming after the correct answers. So I wanted to investigate that for myself, and so I just attempted to do that because it was locked down and I couldn't leave the house. So I found a way to entertain myself, basically.
The chance for Wittock's 19 coughs to be coincidental within the time frame the show was filmed is incredibly low, if these were his only coughs.
And say that half of all of those 192 coughs were Tequin Wittock, then in the statistical trials that I ran, I found that the probability of getting at least 19 coughs would be about 8%.
This ignores the fact that Diana likely too coughed at significant moments.
The analysis I did was just for fun and it's quite silly, but what it convinced me of is that there's no real dispute about the fact that there is some sort of association between coughs and correct answers.
Looking at Shaw's math, the coughs were probably not random. But this clearly was a case of trial by media. According to the New York Times, the actual trial should have been a lot more extensive and critical. They are not sure if there would have been enough evidence to prove guilt. And just as the Ingrams were in the spotlight, another group quietly gamed the show for years. Paddy Spooner was the first person to appear on multiple versions of the show. He won $250,000 in Australia, £250,000 in the UK, and €1,000 in Ireland. He knew how to get on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and made no secret of it.
Well, in England, 7 million people phone in. I worked out the population's a lot smaller, and given that most people wait until they've watched the programme before phoning in, so I made my calls in one evening.
215 in one evening?
Yeah, I'm a pretty boring bloke.
His runs were ice cold, focused, with confident, decisive answers.
The last convicts transported from Britain arrived in Fremantle in which year?
1868.
A. 1848. B. 1858. C. 1868. D. 1878.
I'll play and I'll lock in C, 1868.
You had to go before you even came up, didn't you? All right, let's lock it in. Paddy, you won $250,000.
He dropped out of college and lived off of pub quizzes before going professional. After bombing on the Irish version, Spooner met Keith Burgess. Burgess had helped people to get on the show for a fee. They teamed up to take that business to the next level. Burgess and Spooner built an underground syndicate called the Consortium. They provided a service to reliably get people on the show and to maximize their winnings. Step 1. Get the call. They would spend thousands of pounds and a lot of hours dialing the show's premium rate registration lines. Once through, they played recordings of their clients, leaving messages with their name and number. Step 2. Stall. Once the client got a call back from the show producers, they would answer that he or she wasn't home at the moment. A member of the consortium would then race to the client's home to help with step 3. Get close. Potential contestants had to answer a closest to question on the phone. Say, how tall is Big Ben? 96 meters is correct, but 93 or 100 will do. Spooner figured out that these questions were always pulled from the Office for National Statistics database and that they were asked in rotation. Step 4. Make fingers fast. Reminiscent of the Ingrams, consortium clients would practice on modeled buzzers. Step 5. Fake a friend. Okay, this is for sure the craziest part. Once a client was on the hot seat and used the phone a friend joker, the consortium would reroute this call to a safe house. A neutral person called The Voice would pick up on a phone with a silent mute button. In the room, loads of facts laid out on the floor. Paddy, Keith, a guy named John, a pop culture expert, Poppy at a computer with Google open, and Crack the Bricky, whoever the f that was. The consortium secured 200 spots on the show from 2002 to 2007. 55 clients made it to the hot seat, winning £4.2 million. That's 26% of all the money won on the show during that period. They only stopped because the producers didn't give people second chances anymore if they weren't home, so step 2 fell apart. 25% of the winnings went to Keith Burgess and Paddy Spooner. They published a book about their operation in 2021. None of what they did was illegal. It had no consequences for them. Spooner even met Paul Smith in 2020, explaining to him how they did it. Back in 2003, while the consortium collected cash, the lives of Charles, Diana, and Tagwin were destroyed. The Ingrams faced constant harassment and humiliation in public. Their cat was shot dead with an air gun. They had bags of vomit thrown at their home, windows broken. Their 3 daughters have been bullied at school. Charles resigned from the army. The family went bankrupt. Whittock resigned from his lecturer's job. And perhaps most absurd of all, he had to trademark his name to stop a company from naming cough medicine after him.